Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cheri. I'm a member here at this church, and I am not a well-practiced preacher. For my day job, I'm a speech therapist, and I work in the public school system. Does that work? And my caseload is split between preschool students. So 2.5 days a week I work with kids ages 3 to 5, kindergarten age. And the other 2.5 days a week I work with high school students. And usually when people find out what I do for a living, they say something like, oh, so you are the person who helps people with speech impediments or people who have lisps. And that is one aspect of our job description, but it's just one tiny piece of what we do. There's speech therapists who work in hospitals working with rehabilitation with people who have had traumatic brain injuries or people who have had strokes, regaining their functional communication skills so they can navigate their community. In the school-based setting, we work a lot with students who have disabilities of many different kinds. We work with kids who may have fluency disorders. They have difficulty with stuttering, and so we try to give them some strategies to help them speak more efficiently and smoothly in different environments. We also work with students with cognitive disabilities and try to give them some strategies to use to navigate their community, to interact with people in the grocery store, to be able to ask for help when they need it, to be able to identify the people in their community who need help. And it's a really, really fun job. I feel really blessed to have found this niche. But one of my favorite populations that I get to work with are students who need a little extra help with social communication. So that would be like thinking about how we use our communication skills to get our point across the way we want it to be taken. So that would include like nonverbal communication, using an appropriate tone of our voice to send our message. So if I say, shut the door, or shut the door, I change, based on my tone of voice, I change the message of what I'm meaning to say. And we also work on other nonverbal communication cues like body language and facial expression, and we work on interpreting those cues and just looking at how all of the things, all of the different pieces when we are interacting with each other help us understand the larger context of the message. And it's made me realize in the last couple years as I've been working with these students that I've taken for granted how much our brain does without us even knowing it. So on a rapid pace, when we meet somebody, we look at them, we pay attention to what they're wearing, how their face appears, we look at their posture, we listen to subtle changes in the tone of their voice, and from all of those things we're able to take a smart guess, our best guess, at how they might be feeling or what they're thinking about. And most of us take it for granted that we just do this so automatically. And because we do these things so automatically and we take it for granted, it's kind of been a difficult thing to figure out, okay, how do we break these abstract things down into smaller skills that we can teach in a more concrete way that's understandable. And there's a speech therapist who works in the Silicon Valley, and she's been working there for about 15 years, and she's developed a lot of really helpful tools that take the abstract and break it down into really concrete little pieces, and she calls her program social thinking. So when we think about social, we're thinking about interactions, the way that we communicate with each other, and all of these things that I was talking about. And the reason why her program is so successful is that she realizes when we measure change in behavior, as therapists, like in PT and OT and physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy, we really focus on behavior. So we focus on what people do. So, and that's how we measure progress. So we're really thinking on the outward action part of things. So we write our goals, so-and-so will do this with this % accuracy and this number of trials, 3 out of 4 trials. But what I really appreciate about Michelle Garcia Winter's program is that she backs it up and she takes it back to the thinking stage. Not the behavior stage, but the thinking stage. Because we really can't make changes in our behavior and what we do until we make a change in how we think. And so I have a slide up. I'm going to walk you through one of her learning pieces that's been helpful to me. So when we interact with people, one of the things that we're constantly doing without even realizing it is that we're doing some perspective taking. So we're using our brain to think about what the other person is thinking about. So the first step is when you come into my space, I have a little thought about you, and you have a little thought about me. So, for instance, if we were sitting, I want you to imagine that we all are in a crowded building. When I was on jury duty during the month of October and November, and so I had to take a crowded elevator every day up to the 10th floor of the courthouse in Los Angeles. And every day the elevators were packed. And so without even realizing it, I was having thoughts about the other people in the elevator around me. I wonder what trial they're going to. I bet he's going to I bet he's a witness because, you know, he's he's accompanied by a police officer, or, oh, that person must be a lawyer because she's dressed really, really nice, and nobody in the courthouse is dressed as nice as the lawyers are. And so I'm having these thoughts about people, and people are probably having those thoughts about me. So step 2, and the perspective taking sequence is, I wonder, why are you near me? What is the purpose of you being near me? Is it because you are just sharing the space with me because we have to share the space together? Or do you intend to talk to me? Do you intend to interact with me? And I have to consider all these things when I'm interacting with people, because I have to think about my safety. You know, when we see people on the street, we automatically have to make a quick judgment about them, whether they're a safe person, if we have to react, or if they're friendly. We're gonna use these smart guesses to make a guess about what's gonna happen next. And so then we get to the third step in the process, which is, since we have thoughts about each other, so I'm having thoughts about you, you're having thoughts about me, and then the next step is I start thinking, I wonder what he's thinking about me. So in the elevator coming back from lunch, we start thinking like, oh geez, I hope I don't smell bad. I wonder if I hope that walk from downtown wasn't too, you know, and we start having thoughts. And some of us might get stuck on this part, and we're always worried about what other people are thinking about us and if we're presenting ourselves in the way that we want to. And then the fourth step is that to keep you thinking the way that I want you to think about me, I'm going to monitor and possibly modify my behavior. So to keep you thinking the way that I want you to think about me. So if I want you to think that I am, you know, with my high school students, like, if I want you to think that I'm really cool, then I'm going to change my behavior to help you keep thinking that I'm cool. Or if I want you to think that I'm smart, then I'm going to modify my behavior to keep you thinking that I'm smart. So I'm going to try to say certain words, or I'm going to try to wear certain clothes, or I'm going to try to change my posture in a way that is going to keep you thinking about me the way that I want you to. And it's amazing to me, you know, probably we all do this all the time, and our brains are doing it without us even realizing it. It's a pretty amazing thing. But it's always present. We do this consciously sometimes too. When we prepare to go for a job interview, then we really consciously think about the impression we make. We really are deliberate in the clothes that we choose. We're really thinking about our posture. We're really thinking about how we want to present ourselves. We do this when we go to family gatherings, and or we go to like a high school reunion and we change our outfit 6 times. So we do it on a conscious level too. And this social regulation, it's at the heart of social participation. And when we participate socially, when we're in the presence of others, it's not even just about talking with other people. It's just about sharing space. And we just do this so often. It's all of the time except when we're by ourselves. So as I've been working with these students on these different skills and really thinking about how our brain does this and what it means in our interactions with others, because I'm a follower of Jesus and because I'm really interested in studying the way that he interacted with people, it's made me kind of think of Jesus in the framework of social thinking. As a junior high student, I remember church van pilgrimages to Christian music festivals in the summer, where Christian music and Christian t-shirts and Christian jewelry and Christian breath mints were peddled in the name of Jesus. And I remember proudly sporting a WWJD bracelet and really tried to think about what would Jesus do. And as I've been thinking about the social thinking and how our thoughts shape our behavior, I realized that maybe all along, maybe we should have been wearing bracelets that said WWJT. What would Jesus think? I realized we have to be extremely careful in this exercise because once we start, presuming what Jesus' thoughts are, we get into dangerous territory in taking God's name in vain. And I'm not talking about taking his name in vain and swearing. I mean speaking on his behalf and speaking about what he's thinking and being able to interpret that with authority. But I still think it's an important exercise to think about not only how Jesus thought about the people he interacted with when he was on earth, but also how he thinks about us, and how understanding that may shape our understanding of how we think about each other. And when we think about each other the way that Jesus thinks about us, and the way that Jesus thinks about the people that we interact with, how will that change our behavior? And how will that change the way that we do some of these things? It makes me think, if I were to step into an elevator with Jesus and he had a little thought about me and the others in the elevator, what would those thoughts be? As we look at the ministry of Jesus, if we look at his interactions with people, we see a pattern. We see that status, popularity, stability, and security are things that didn't seem to matter to him, which is kind of, when I think about that, it makes me a little bit anxious, because stability is something that matters to me. Security is something that matters to me. Even if status and popularity is something that I hope don't matter to me as much, those other two things really do. Jesus ate with tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, and we think about that a lot when this community is a community that's very committed to social justice. So we try to think of the people that other people are not thinking about. But Jesus also ate with Pharisees as well, and he had thoughts about them. The social life of Jesus didn't fit the norm by either standard. He didn't stay with one sect of the population. And the people of his time, what were some of the thoughts that they had about him? Here is a man who didn't settle in one place. He didn't hold down a job. He wasn't productive. He wasn't responsible in his town. Instead, he was always on the move. He was supported by nobodies who also quit their jobs and was roaming hither and yon. They were supported by women. I wonder what Peter's wife and mother-in-law thought about Peter quitting his fishing business in Capernaum to follow this man. And what did his neighbors think? Who was this shiftless Nazarene who didn't seem to have much to do with his own town people and instead spent his time in the lonely places preaching and teaching to praying and teaching to a nondescript crowd. He even said himself, "Foxes have holes and birds have the air and the nest, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." I'm sure people had lots of thoughts about him, and we kind of explore this later. But what does this say about Jesus? I think it says that what mattered to him and the thoughts that he had about people were not related necessarily to the things that we value. So that might be something that I should think about when I start thinking about how I think about other people. It's really easy to judge people who we think aren't following the roles or the way that life should be played out. You know, the American dream is that we're supposed to get an education and get a job and acquire some property, and maybe that works for some people, but maybe people who don't follow that role, maybe we need to check our thoughts that we have about those people. Anyway, just a thought. I think if Jesus got on an elevator with me and a group of people at the LA County Courthouse, he might be having a thought. He might be thinking, "You are all my neighbor," especially if you don't think you are. There's one of the most powerful parables of Jesus is the parable of the Good Samaritan, which we all know very well. And most people today think that being a Good Samaritan would be a wonderful compliment. It would be considered someone would be considered in very high regard if they were called a Good Samaritan. But the power of this parable lies in the question that Jesus presents the Samaritan as the model of neighborliness and an answer to the Jewish theologian's question, "Who is my neighbor?" A Samaritan who was looked down on by the Jews, held up as a model of the proper response to others in the name of God. From a first century Jewish perspective, it could not have been more offensive than that. The person who thinks the most differently than I, the person who comes from the most divergent background from myself, that is the person Jesus names as my neighbor. Sometimes, I guess you could consider me someone who might be pegged as a bleeding heart. I'm somebody who tends to have, my heart goes out to populations that I see as facing hardships. And so it's easier for me sometimes to have compassion on communities that have faced struggles. But when I was reading this and thinking about this sermon this week, I realized that Jesus isn't calling just the people who are downtrodden our neighbors. He's calling us to think about the people who think the most differently than we do. I sometimes watch not late night talk shows, but I watch cable shows on TV, comedy ones, where they make fun of all of the political things that are happening, and Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart, and I enjoy the smug you deserve how much they're making fun of you because you people are so dumb. How can you possibly say that? And I enjoy when somebody who thinks different from me is made a fool of on TV. I love it when they get the best one-liner and they find the best clip that makes the people who think differently than me look the most ridiculous. And yet, I don't think that's how Jesus thinks. If Jesus is pointing out to me in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that my neighbor is the person who thinks most differently than me, has the most divergent background from me, understands the world in a much different framework than I do, and he's calling me to love my neighbor. Neighbors are very important people. The commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, comes up in what I found, and I'm not a biblical scholar, so there's probably more places. I found 10 different verses in the Bible where it says, love your neighbor as yourself. In Leviticus, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew 19:19, honor your father, your mother, and love your neighbor as yourself. A second and equally important, Matthew 22, love your neighbor as yourself. Mark 12:31, love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Luke 10:27, the man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Romans 13:8, owe nothing to anyone except your obligation to love one another. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law. Romans 13:9, you must not commit adultery, you must not commit murder, you must not steal, you must not covet. The commandments are all summed up in one commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. James 2:8, yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. For the whole law can be summed up in one command, Galatians 5:14, love your neighbor as yourself. So we know that we know the golden rule is an important thing. It's kind of a linchpin in our Christian philosophy, isn't it? In the words of John Mayer, love is a verb. It's something we do. We read books like the 5 Love Languages because we want to learn how we can behave in a way that communicates love to other people most efficiently and translate our feelings into measurable and tangible behavior. It's not that it's bad to work on behavior, but we also have to consider the thoughts that drive our behavior. If we're going to do what Jesus would do, if we're going to love like Jesus would love, then we have to start by thinking how Jesus would think. In the 20 months since I've become a mother, I've discovered that the mommy world is an extremely harsh, unforgiving, judgmental place. I've quickly learned that nearly everyone has an opinion about everything that has to do with child raising. There is definitely a right and a wrong way to change a diaper, lay a baby to sleep, feed a baby, and definitely a right way to do things will change depending on who you're talking to. So you're never safe. So I've learned pretty quickly that most of the time it's not safe to tell another person how you care for your child, because judgment will surely follow. If you co-sleep with your child, he will suffocate and die in your bed. If you put your child to sleep in the crib, he will not form an appropriate attachment to you. If you respond to your child's cry, you will spoil him. If you don't respond to your child's cry, he will have abandonment issues and not trust you. If you return to work, then you are basically giving the precious task of raising your child to another. But if you don't return to work, you are not providing a model of an independent and intelligent woman to your child. No matter who you are, if you are a mother, you cannot escape the judgment. And that's why I was literally brought to tears when I encountered this blog. So I'm going to show you some of the pictures. So you'll have to forgive me because it's probably going to make me teary now. But, sorry. A couple months ago, I came across this link, and it's a group of moms in, I think, Connecticut. Sorry. And they're mothers from diverse backgrounds. They come at life from different perspectives. They think things differently. And yet they've decided that it's more important to love each other than try to change each other. And so I'm going to go through a sequence of pictures. This one says, I had a natural home birth and I had a scheduled C-section. I let my baby reasonably cry it out, and I never let my baby cry. My family eats separately most nights, and my family eats together at the dinner table every night. I'm breastfeeding my 2-year-old. I chose to have formula feed from the start. I give my children mostly organic food. I let my children eat fast food. I couldn't wait to go back to work, and I wish my maternity leave would have been longer. I send my children to public school. I homeschool my children. I co-sleep with my child, and my child sleeps in her own room. I work outside the home, and I'm a stay-at-home mom. And the mommy wars. Let's love more and judge less. Sorry. Sometimes I forget. Sorry. Sometimes I forget the visceral response. Part of the response that I'm having is not just to those women loving each other, but it's to really letting myself experience the visceral response to the unconditional embrace, acceptance, and love of my Creator. I'm enough just as I am, and I forget to live in this reality. I forget to embrace the reality that God loves me how I am, and I forget to think about how He thinks about me. That third step in the perspective-taking process. I have a thought about you, you have a thought about me, and then I start having a thought about what you have a thought about me. Sometimes we have thoughts about God, but we don't remember the thoughts that He's having about us. I'm really grateful for this community because all of you do such a wonderful job of reminding me of who I am to God. And when I think about sharing space with someone who shuts down any thoughts of judgment and chooses to embrace thoughts of love, I feel so safe. And I hope that many of you have experienced that love in this community as well. I feel safe, I feel liberated, but I feel empowered. And yet, I still have a hard time realizing that when I do not remember how Jesus thinks about me, it's impossible for me to think about the others the way that He thinks about them. And I have to think about the others the way He thinks about them if I'm going to love them the way that He has loved me. As He loved Mary, as He loved Zacchaeus, as He loved Peter, James, and John. This week, I'm going to get on an elevator with a stranger. I'm going to share the freeway with an anonymous driver. I'm going to get behind someone at the grocery store. And I'm going to have to work with a host of personalities at my job. I'll interact with a lot of different family members. I'm going to share space with lots of other people. I will notice them. They will notice me. And I will have thoughts about them, and they will have thoughts about me. And I just hope that I can replace some of the thoughts. You're annoying, you're dumb, you're flighty, you're ridiculous, with you're my neighbor. And I love you like I love myself. It just might be the best way to live out the challenge. So now I am giving to you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you. As I have loved you, you should love each other.